2024. And to be specific, I think we're talking about Apache Exhibit B4. Is that sufficient to complete groundwater contamination delineation in this area based on your current understanding of the information?
Well, I think it's a reasonable step to hopefully complete the delineation. We every time we do more work, we learn something, but I think it's a reasonable step that will either tell us that we're done or guide future direct decisions.
Okay.
Future investigation.
And given that answer, this is probably obvious, but do you believe that the September 2024 proposal submitted by Apache is at least a good faith response to OCD's conditions of approval?
Well, I think it is. You know, you're putting in 7 additional monitoring wells, and this is a big effort, and it's not a zero risk game to go do this. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of equipment, and you don't want to do the work unnecessarily. This will give us a lot of information, and if additional work is needed, Apache has shown every willingness to do it. So to me, it's a completely reasonable next step to take.
Okay. Mr. Grams, I do have one exhibit I need to follow up on, and I may need to pull it up here, but do you recall Apache Exhibit C5, which is, it says existing and proposed monitoring well map 2024?
Yeah. This had the same problems as our original C1. It's, for example, you don't see the farthest up, or do you? I guess. Oh, no. Okay. No, this is showing it all. This is okay. Yeah.
So can you describe what this map is and who prepared it?
Yeah, no, we prepared this again to show a comparison of what OCD has requested and what Apache has proposed. And it's a Google Earth image of the site. Doesn't have all the lines and contours on it. So you can see a little bit more of the existing oil and gas operations and what the site looks like.
Okay. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but is there any particular features shown on the Google Earth image that you'd point out to the commissioners?
Well, yeah. So if you look at the T-shaped spill, you heard people talk about the low-lying area. So the spill started at the junction box at number 7 and flowed west a certain distance, and at the midpoint flowed south. And that area at the termination where TMW1 is located is the low-lying area, which is, this is a very arid desert-like area. And whenever it rains a lot, water flows down there and accumulates there and evaporates and infiltrates.
Okay. Any other features here that you'd like to point out?
Now, we see a well pad there at TMW, is that 36? Flow lines, I don't know, yeah.
Okay.
There's roads, I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough, but nothing of particular note from your perspective.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I think you see a series of roads there. I think that those are all created by going back and forth to the wells.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Grams, do you have anything else to add, or does that conclude your direct testimony?
That concludes my direct testimony.
Okay.
Thank you.
Will you be available to listen to the division's witnesses testify and provide any rebuttal testimony if called again by Apache?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. With that, I believe this witness is available for cross-examination.
Okay, that's awesome. I go, please.
If I might, before I forget, I should move to admit Apache's exhibits C, C1, C2, C3, C4.1, and C5 into evidence.
Mr. Tremaine, any issues with that?
No objections.
Okay, so we'll enter them. Before we pass Mr. Grams over to Mr. Tremaine for cross-examination, I need a little break. So let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
We will come back at 3:55.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. Thank you. We're back on the record. Mr. Grams is our witness right now. Mr. Mullenberg, you are done with your questioning, correct? Okay, excellent. You've admitted and you're done. So, Mr. Tremaine, we switch it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Good afternoon, Mr. Grams.
Good afternoon.
I want to ask you a couple general questions, and then bear with me because I need to clarify a couple things that you addressed in your direct. So starting out, I want to refer you to what's labeled in here as exhibit, Apache exhibit in the C packet, C3 on page 23 of 143. So I'll share that now. And I believe you had testified as to the content of this and several other maps a few minutes ago, correct? Do you recognize this?
Yes.
Okay. So zooming out for a second, what is the approximate land area, or specifically, if you know it, that's depicted on this map?
I think it's about 40 or 50 acres, but I'd have to measure, but that's what I recall.
Okay. And you've testified to identify the what we're calling, I think you're referring to it as a chloride plume centered around TMW 17. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. And that chloride plume extends to the bulk of the area depicted here. Is that accurate?
Well, most of the wells on the outskirts, we believe, are showing background or near background.
Uh-huh.
So it's not the whole map.
And that's a good point, Mr. Grams. What is Apache considering background for chlorides?
That has not been fully determined, but I think that it's reasonable to assume something in the 200 to 300s in this area would be background. But that's one of the purposes of the 2 upgradient wells, is to get another set of input on that.
Great, thank you. So the wells, the various wells that are reading above that, above 250, 300-ish for chlorides, are likely to be considered a part of this chloride plume. Is that accurate?
Well, they're likely to show the impacts of oil and gas activity in the area. Whether it's all from this plume or not, I can't exactly say.
Okay. I think I have to press you on that one a little bit. I think you testified earlier that you are assuming a single release. Is that in preparing for this hearing, is it still accurate to say that you and Apache are assuming that there is a single release causing?
We are assuming that's fair. We are assuming there's a single release, but we also are fully aware that in the oil patch, there are areas of high chloride. There's old reserve pits. There's just a whole history of operations that you can see if you look hard enough. And so, it would be not fair to not recognize that that exists.
Thank you. In your experience, is a chloride plume of this size in groundwater common occurrence?
Well, it's not a common occurrence, except maybe in the oil patch in the Permian Basin, where there's a long history of chloride disposal in surface pits. That's very well documented in the literature and changing regulations that regulate how that material is handled.
Are you aware of any surface pits in the area depicted in this map?
I am not.
Okay. Are you aware of any investigation by Terracon, Apache, or your predecessor consultant to determine whether or not there might be chloride contamination as a result of any pits?
I'm not aware of that at this location, no.
Okay. Zooming out again, how many sites are you currently managing that you would characterize as comparable to the size of this area impacted on the slide I have up?
I have 4 projects where there's fairly significant impacts from chlorides that I'm working on, and many more where it's much just soil and much less.
Okay. I want to jump back to this assumption of a single release. If we do, let's say we buy that assumption, everybody assumes it's a single release. Given the impacted area here in the samples that you're seeing with the fourth quarterly report, how much water, produced water, would have had to have been released to cause the groundwater chloride levels present in the latest sampling report?
That's a really good question, and we haven't done it. We can look at and estimate the mass by using the contours that we have. We have pretty good data, and I can look at the concentrations and the contours and do an estimate for that. But that has not been done. That calculation has not been done, to my knowledge.
Do you even have the original release was, I believe the testimony was it was initially reported as like 100 barrels, but that was determined to be inaccurate and was then labeled as unidentified. Safe to say this is much more than 100 barrels.
I think I would not be going out on a limb to say that if this is all from that junction box, it was considerably more than 100 barrels. I
Okay.
would guess.
If you were to perform the same kind of assessment, like estimating the volume, and you look at the March sampling report versus the fourth quarter sampling report, would you agree that you would come up with a different, much larger result for than the volume that must have been released if you're looking at the fourth quarter report?
Yes, you would. The higher MW14 has a much higher concentration.
Okay. We heard some testimony earlier today. Did you listen to the prior Apache testimony, Mr. Grams?
Yes.
Okay. I think we heard some testimony regarding possible sources of a single assumed or potentially multiple sources. And I believe those referred to, the primary culprit was referred to as likely a junction box. Do you recall that?
Yep.
I believe there was some discussion about possibility of leaking flow lines. Do you recall or accept that?
Yeah, the junction box is a part of a network of pipelines that carry produced water. So I assume that's what is being discussed.
Would you agree that a junction box or flow lines that we're talking about are at or very near to ground surface?
My understanding is that they're within 3 feet of ground surface.
You had referenced earlier, I actually have it right here, this TMW 17 as the original point of the release, and I kind of talked about that a little bit. Do you know what the depth to groundwater from ground surface is at that point or near to it?
At number 7, I believe. I don't know offhand. I don't know. I think it's in the range of 40 to 60 feet. I'd have to look at the tables.
Okay. So that would mean that between a junction box and water, there would be something like 37 to 57 feet or more of soil, correct?
Correct.
If there is a substantial release of produced water, well, I'll limit it to chlorides. If there's a chloride contamination as a result of a leak at a box or line or whatever point at or near the ground surface, would you agree that that would mean that there would be chloride contamination in the soil immediately adjacent to that source?
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me. If there are chlorides in soil that are, for whatever reason, migrating into and impacting groundwater, would you agree that in order to remediate the site, you have to isolate or remove those chlorides?
chlorides that are remaining in the soil would continue to leach unless you put a cap on it and prevented additional infiltration, such as is done in mining cases. But typically you try to remove the source. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah.
I think we're saying the same thing here, Mr. Grams. That would be the liner in the 2019 plan. Put a liner underneath the chlorides so that when there's infiltration, the chlorides don't migrate to groundwater. That's the same idea, right?
Yeah, or above it too. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
But that's what you're referring to, a cap is something like a liner.
Yeah.
Another viable option is to dig out the chlorides or other contamination.
Yes,
That's a pretty common practice. Would you agree?
that is done. Yep.
So if you have to isolate or remove contamination that's leaching into groundwater, with the distances between these wells, how can you know where you have to put a liner or where you have to dig?
Well, if I were to plan an excavation here, I would propose a number of soil borings first to fully delineate the extent that needs to be removed. And we typically do that. We'll use a geoprobe or other, even hand augers sometimes, to define the area first so that you know what you're getting into when you dig.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to cut you off there. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Quite all right. In Apache's latest additional scope of work, how many soil borings did they propose?
There were 4 proposed.
Pardon me. All right. And I want to now draw your attention to see if I can pull this up. All right. Pardon me. Thing keeps getting in my way. Ask you a question about page 23 and jump back to the infamous 169 and 170 I keep referring to. So in your earlier testimony, I heard some explanation about a high point, I believe you called it at TMW4. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you recall earlier hearing testimony from Mr. Bull to the effect of the previous groundwater levels at that same point, TMW4, may have been noted in error?
I do.
Okay. So on this page 23 of Terracon's exhibit, or Terracon's prepared exhibits for Apache, we have this area that represents on the map as an elevated point in groundwater, correct?
Correct.
Is that consistent with something called, potentially consistent with something called groundwater mounding?
Yeah, that would be a term you could use for that.
Okay. And I believe that you had represented there the possibility of that mounding due to infiltration from rainwater. Is that correct?
I speculated that that may be something that we're seeing, but yeah,
Possible.
it's possible.
So going back to, I know this map is depicted. Oh, geez, one moment. I gotta be careful with that cursor. This map is depicted quite a bit differently, but I'm on page 169 of 733. This is in the packet of B exhibits presented by Apache and admitted. This was taken in March of 2024. Would you agree?
Yes.
And I had some questions I've already referred to Mr. Bull earlier. Wouldn't you agree that TMW4 actually represents this potential groundwater mounding in this previous map?
Yeah, it seems to show the same feature that we're showing in the October map.
Would you understand then kind of feedback that rainwater infiltration may not represent a very plausible justification for this mounding effect that's seen in both March and December?
I'd really have to, well, it wasn't seen in December. It was seen in March and the October, November. But I'd have to do a little bit more work. I did look at precipitation data for a nearby gauging station. There was 1.5 inches of rain the month before our October groundwater levels. That's kind of what got me thinking about that. I don't know about March, so I'd have to do a little bit more work to see if it's
Okay.
plausible. Maybe there's a ton of rain. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to your exhibits now and refer you to page 16 of 143 in the C exhibit packets from Apache. And so I have this on the screen here. This is the summary of groundwater analytical results prepared by Terracon. These were the samples taken in October and provided to OCD last week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the yellow depicted or highlighted fields, these represent either chlorides or TDS that are over the water limits. Is that correct?
Yes, those are the values that exceed the water quality standards.
And there's two pages here, so I'll scroll down just so you see the scope of what I'm referring to. But OCD would highlight that most of these wells are showing overages in the latest sample, and they are, if you look, they are actually showing increases in both chlorides and TDS at the same location over time with the additional sampling events. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I looked at this just before my testimony, and there are 10 wells that show an increase and 13 are about the same. 2 actually went down. So that's how the data is characterized.
Okay. And so there are now 4 wells with chloride results in the latest sampling event, which are over 7,000 milligrams per liter, correct?
I'll take your word for it.
Okay. The one that we talked about most is the TMW 17, and that one is now at 14,900 milligrams per liter, correct?
Right.
Prior to that sampling event, were there any wells that were over 6,000 milligrams per liter?
I'd honestly have to go back and check to be sure. I don't recall the highest number before.
Given the substantial jump in the levels at some of the wells, is it safe to conclude that the wells are not from a current and active release?
I don't know how to answer that. I'm not clear. Could you restate that, please?
Okay, can you, when you look at this sampling data and see the results, particularly at the wells that have increased substantially, can you definitively say that these chloride levels and TDS levels are not the result of a current and active release?
Yeah, the only thing that could maybe explain it too is continued leaching out of a source that raised the amounts. But I honestly don't know. I just don't know how to explain it. Yeah.
Okay. And is it also safe to say that this level of chloride plume was not previously detected in the area from or I guess, let me rephrase. Would you agree with the statement that this level of chloride contamination in this plume was not depicted or detected in the area from the prior sampling events.
No, it's the concentrations are higher in the most recent sampling event.
Okay. So specifically looking at certain results like TMW6 here, for instance, this is on page 16, looking at this second field. This one definitely caught our attention where we went, the result went from 3,280 milligrams per liter TDS up to 11,700. And to clarify the foundation of my question, that's not chlorides. Chlorides went down a little bit. So concerning that TMW6, does Terracon or Apache have any idea what caused that large jump of over 8,000 TDS?
You know, I really don't, because typically we see chloride and TDS moving in tandem. They usually higher TDS, higher chloride. They go together. So this is very puzzling, and I can't explain it.
Did Apache request the lab that provided these samples to provide any, or that tested the samples, provided the results, to provide any additional results to identify the TDS constituents, which based on this chart, we're assuming are not chlorides?
No, we did not ask that. No.
Okay, so I want to go to, I think I'm done there. I'm gonna go to page 27, and just ask you some general questions. Is this the analytical report prepared by the lab that was incorporated into Terracon's latest report for the fourth quarter monitoring?
Yes.
Okay.
There were 3 reports, I believe, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything you need to clarify there? I mean, my question is directed at this is part of that report that we got on the 8th.
Correct.
Okay. Great. 1 second. When did the lab provide the results from the chloride and TDS sampling to Terracon or Apache?
I'm not prepared to discuss the timing. I don't know. I'd have to look.
Okay. Is it your experience that chloride and TDS sampling typically comes back faster than the, for instance, 3103 constituents?
Yes.
Okay. And in your experience, what's a typical turnaround time for those type of lab results for
Our
chlorides and TDS?
standard turnaround time is 2 weeks for if we don't pay extra.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did Apache take any immediate response actions after learning about the increased levels of chlorides and or TDS that we've been discussing on that page 16 and 17?
No, I don't believe so.
I think that's my only questions on that. I want to go to page 3 of the amended exhibit, Apache C-4.1. All right, and I think you may have answered some of this, so bear with me. But concerning the groundwater elevation at TMW 14, that was identified as an issue by OCD. Can you please explain what happened there in the recording of that groundwater elevation?
Yeah, so I dug into that in a frenzy this morning. And what I found is that the notes from our field technician recorded a water level of, I believe it was 65.91, and it was transcribed as 63. So there was a mix-up of of 2 feet. A 5 was transcribed as a 3. And that was in one table. Another table was done correctly. We had 2 different tables. One table, we try to make pretty for the reports, so it's easy to read. The other table is the analytical table that's used for the groundwater flow mapping. So the flow was based on the correct elevation, but the value that you saw on the table and that ended up getting written on the report was the wrong value. But the flow map was used based on the correct elevation number.
Okay, so we're dealing with a scrivener's error in lawyer terms. It's like a copying error, and with the corrected elevation, we're not looking at groundwater mounding at that location.
No, correct.
But we are still looking at a bubble or potential groundwater mounding at TMW4.
Yes. And I've had the team digging into QA/QC all day today, so yes.
All right. I think I got to go back to. I want to go to page 65 of 143 in the Exhibit B packet. And this one is, of course, sideways, so I can try and get it. So I believe that this represents, if you can see it, that the samples were taken on October 28th. Is that of 2024? Is that correct?
For these samples, yes.
And these are, I should have started here. These are the 3103 constituents at
Yes.
TMW 17.
Yep.
And were those analytical results included in the December 2023 report?
I think they were. They should have been.
Okay. Did go ahead.
Well, I'd point out that there are different bottle orders and different parameters requested for 17 windmill and 24. Do you see the numbers below the sample types?
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to rotate the page so everyone can see it in a landscape orientation, and my PDF has locked up. So I think I'll come back to this question if that's all right. I think I have some clarifying questions that we can get to without dealing with this. But we've gotten that the 3103 constituents at the TMW 17 were taken on October 28th. And did Apache test for all 3103 constituents at that monitoring well at that time?
I would have to double check the results to see if all were done.
You need my PDF to unlock. Let me, oh, there we go.
There it is.
All right, well, I must have hit something in the right order there because it rotated. All right, so in looking at this at TM, and this has the windmill, TMW 17 and 24. I believe that's the clarification you were making earlier.
Yes.
Is there any, do you need to provide any clarification or explanation as to the different, following up on your previous answer? I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I would just point out that for TMW 17, you'll see there was 60 mil VOAs, there was 40 mil VOAs. There were bottles ordered for that well that were not ordered for windmill and 24.
Okay.
So you'll, in the lab report, you'll see different results.
Okay.
Different report, different parameters. Yeah.
Okay. So for TMW 17, did Apache test for all 3103 constituents?
I can't say that I know all constituents, so I can't answer that in the affirmative.
Are you aware of any reasons for excluding any particular 3103 constituents from that test?
No, none were specifically excluded. So the lab ran what they ran. But I don't know.
Okay. And it's sampling also occurred at the windmill you had indicated. Did that occur at the same time as the TMW 17?
Yes.
Were any 3103 constituents omitted from that test?
I don't think they ran the 30. I think there was an error. And they did not run 3103 on that. I don't think they were supposed to, and we did not.
Okay. And the same question for TMW 34 or 24. Were any 3103 constituents omitted from that test? And if so, was there a reason for that?
No, I just think they didn't run. That's why you see I think that there was an issue with the sample bottles they had available. And so they didn't get that done for those locations. So
Okay.
that has to be done next time.
Okay. Right. See. Trying to find the sample result. Actually, let me move on. I may come back to that. So- okay. A couple clarifying questions. I'm back to page 23 to talk about your earlier responses to the spacing of the wells and your assessment of the need for particular wells proposed by OCD versus Apache. So TMW 40, I can.
Would
Am I?
That would be between 19 and 23.
Okay, 19 and 23. Okay, I have the wrong page, I think. Let's go over
There you
here rather, page
There you
3.
go.
This is okay, much better. Thank you. So TMW 40, that is, I think you've established that is down gradient of TMW 17, correct?
Correct?
How far away is TMW 40 from TMW 17?
It looks like it's about 1,000 feet.
Okay. And also TMW 36 was proposed by OCD. That's a little closer down gradient to TMW 17.
Correct.
And I know you had testified as to Apache's willingness to put in some of these wells, but TMW 36 and TMW 40, to clarify, Apache did not agree to put in those wells down gradient from TMW 17.
That's correct.
Okay. And then I have the same question, TMW 41, that's also further down gradient from TMW 17. Apache did not agree to install TMW 41.
That's correct. We thought 25 would serve the purpose down there.
Okay. What do you know what the distance is between TMW 23 and TMW 24?
It looks like it's maybe about 600 feet, but I don't know.
Understood. Okay. All right. I think I'm wrapping up here, Mr. Grams. Appreciate it. Jumping back to TMW 17 real quick, regarding these chlorides at 14,900. In your experience, would it be normal to jump from 5,600 milligrams per liter to 14,900 due to a rain influx?
No, so there is one thing I should point out, if I may. We saw the high numbers at 17 from the March sampling. And so one thing that the field guys did was they purged TMW 17 extensively before collecting the sample. So they pumped maybe, I don't remember the number, 20 well volumes of water out of it. So that could have resulted in some different results.
Okay, thank you for that. Did did they also purge the other wells in a similar manner?
No, no.
So while the volumes, so for instance, let's be specific, TMW 18, if that one was not purged in the same manner, I think that one went from 900 to 7,800. So purging wouldn't explain the dramatic increase in the sample at TMW 18. Would you agree?
I would agree with that.
Okay. Okay, so if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, it sounds like you're working under the assumption that currently that there's one release, but you can't rule out multiple sources or deposits of chlorides in soil that are continuing to leach or migrate into groundwater. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And from the current map, it is not possible to know precisely where you would have to install a cap or a liner or dig out contaminated material. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me check one thing. Thank you for bearing with me, but I think I'm done. Mr. Grams, I don't have any further questions for you. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Let's turn to our commissioners. Oh,
I do have a little redirect.
I'm sorry.
Mr.
I forgot to
Chairman.
ask you. Yes, your redirect, please. My apologies.
Just a couple things to clarify. Mr. Graham's, do you recall Mr. Tremaine's questions relating to, I guess as he put it, Apache's view that we're thinking about this being the result of a single release?
Um,
Do you
I
recall those
remember that
questions?
being discussed, yeah.
Yeah. Thinking about single release in terms of what is known and unknown, time, location, and such, would you have any reason to clarify your answer in terms of a single release, let's say, or maybe location of releases?
Well, a single release could go on for a period of time. If that junction box was a source, we don't know how long that was potentially leaking. The other thing would be, if that's a pipeline run and there's a leak, it can run, usually the pipeline backfill is a lower permeability than the surrounding soil, so it can go a distance along that run and drop out at a lower permeability zone somewhere along that run. And so it could show up in different places.
Fair enough. And in this discussion of single release, are we distinguishing that from the known release that triggered the initial actions by Apache?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Is it your understanding that there was a reported release that was known because it showed up at the surface?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Are you when you talk about a single release, are you distinguishing that in any way from the known release that surfaced?
I don't think so. I mean, a single release point, I mean, when I think of a single release, that can mean a lot of different things.
Okay.
A tank or a pipe can have a release that goes on for many years, and I guess that's a single release.
Or at least you have a release from a single location.
A single location, yeah.
Okay. Do you recall a question from Mr. Tremaine about isolating or removing chlorides to prevent groundwater contamination?
Yes.
And is it your understanding that that would likely be referring to chlorides in soils, or perhaps the Vado zone, as somebody might call it,
I
versus
assume that's what
ground.
he's referring to. That's what Apache did after this spill. Yep.
And that would be distinct from chlorides in groundwater itself.
Those are two different things. Yeah.
Two different things. And I think Mr. Tremaine may have asked you a question about removal of chlorides and looking at the distance between two wells. Thinking about the difference between chlorides in soils or the Vado zone versus chlorides in groundwater. Would that cause you to think any differently about your responses to those questions?
Well, the approach to removing chloride in groundwater is completely different than the approach to removing chloride in soil. So yeah, you need different information, and those are two different stories.
And if you're talking about a particular area, at least in a plane on the surface, and you're thinking about two different wells, that could be either groundwater chloride levels or chlorides in soils or the Vado zone, or perhaps both.
Well, the wells are showing us chlorides in groundwater,
Right.
right?
Right.
And if we were to need to remove chlorides in soil, that's a different proposition. That's a different.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to
No worries.
skip you over earlier. Now we'll turn over to the commissioners. I'll start with you, Commissioner Bloom, if you have any questions.
Maybe one question. Mr. Grams, thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Tremaine's last question to you was, would the current map tell you where to dig your cap? I believe you said no. Is that right?
I think that's what he said. Yeah.
Okay. And would your plan, the Apache plan moving forward, would that get you to that point, or would Apache potentially have to do more work to characterize the situation there?
No, our intent is that for that scope of work, combined with the pump test is a part of it, and the soil borings would give us the information we need to fully understand, fully delineate the perimeter, and have enough information to be able to put a well in if we wanted to do some sort of recovery. So that would be the intent. We never know for sure what we're going to see, and so it's possible there would be some additional questions to be answered.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you for your time.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Bloom. Commissioner Mpoma, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Grams, for your testimony. Do have a couple of questions for you. I need to go over my notes here. So with regards to how you developed the groundwater flow, is that more or less analytical approach?
Pardon me?
Is that analytical approach that you utilized?
A what approach?
Analytical.
Yeah.
So do you believe that if more or less you've used more modern tools like the computer modeling, would that have improved your results or understanding?
So a true groundwater model requires knowledge of aquifer parameters that we don't know today. And so you have to put in, for example, hydraulic conductivity is a key variable, and that we will determine with a pump test. So an aquifer pump test, we put in a pump, we run it, we measure the drawdown in the well and in surrounding wells. Then you turn the pump off and you watch it all recover. And that tells you about the hydraulic properties. And that provides the data that you can put into a model and do a real groundwater model. We don't have that data today.
And you can do a little bit of history matching to see, or more or less to compare the results that you are getting from the lab and then what you are more or less getting down there too.
Yeah, yep.
So would you prioritize doing that, as one of the steps to avoid more like now more or less additional 20 wells?
I would. I am not the one who controls the scope, but yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Okay. So, that is why I still go back to the modeling, because if you look at the footprint of the release, is it easy to explain this scientifically, with regards to like the elevation of the chloride throughout this whole area?
Well, so that's, you would have to almost assume that this has been going on a little bit longer than since 2019. When I look at it.
Yeah. So the extent of the problem is not really known at this point.
Well, but if you look at the map, we have wells that are low all around it. So we know we have it defined geographically. So we do have that part fairly well delineated. There's some uncertainty with our dashed lines. We're going to fill that in with the additional wells. But really, it's pretty well defined.
Okay.
It's not perfect, but realize this is all occurring 60 feet down and you can't see it. So we make inferences based on our data.
Okay. So if you look at the results that have been coming in since 2019, don't you believe that from NMOCD point of view, they are trying to do extensive due diligence? Because if you see some of these chlorides in nearby wells of residents in the area, that is a little bit of a problem. So would you agree to that you're trying to do due diligence here?
I think that it's been mutual. I think Apache and OCD have been trying to do due diligence.
Then a question I have for you is that do you believe Apache and NMOCD do have the same objective? With this,
For the most part, they do. I'm speculating a little bit on their objective, but yeah, I think they do for the most part. If you really look at the communication throughout this release, there's been a lot of collaboration and agreement between Apache and OCD. It really wasn't until this last scope of work in July or April, May, June, July, that it became a disagreement. Up to that point, they were working collaboratively.
okay. Just to clarify and solidify my point here,
I would say.
does Apache's plan include the pump test and then also the modeling, subsequent modeling?
We didn't spell that out, but yeah, that's something that we can do. The type of modeling that is always done as a part of a pump test gets to modeling the drawdown and the aquifer response. A full contaminant transport model is a different thing, and that was not part of our proposal. So that's something we would have to discuss.
Yeah.
There's different.
Because that
models.
is the one that I'm looking for, though.
That's the one you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at, and I really do like the map that is on 719 out of the 733 document. So thanks for taking time to take us through that. Do you believe that a stage-wise approach, is more warranted here than more or less? I don't know. In terms of the condition, I don't know if, let's say, NMOCD is requesting that you drill all these wells at once, or we go stepwise. Can you speak to that?
Well, if you put in 20 wells at once, you probably find that some of them were not necessary. If you go in a stepwise approach, you take the information from each well, you reevaluate, and then you put your next investigation location in depending upon what you know. So it allows you to consider and plan a little more deliberately. And so now, I mean, I'll just go out on a limb and say if resources were unlimited, then we could go in and put 100 wells in and we would know everything we need to know. But given that resources are limited, then we take a stepwise approach and we try to be reasonable in what we put in and what we do.
So Apache's and NMOCD's plan, which one is stepwise approach?
Well, I think, I mean, for example, one of the things that OCD went to great pains to point out is that every communication says, you know, you can do this, but you might have to do more, right? We know that. So to me, Apache's plan would be consider it phase one.
Okay.
And if it tells us everything we need to know, hallelujah, we're done. But if not, we go back and we would have to do more. It would be a stepwise approach. And maybe phase two would be the rest of the OCD wells.
Has NMOCD and Apache actually discussed both locations? So I'm referring to the figure, what's the figure number? But the figure on 719, where you show all the wells, blue and then green.
Blue and green.
So has NMOCD and Apache actually discussed this?
No, that was the frustrating point. The discussions were cut off at that point, so it was not discussed.
So do you believe that a discussion between Apache and NMOCD to optimize these locations is a must happen?
I think
Kind
that
of,
would be a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So who put this one first? Is it NMOCD or Apache?
Well, so my understanding, I wasn't involved at the time. My understanding is that there was a discussion between NMOCD and Apache. As a result, Apache prepared a written proposal for 5 wells. OCD came back and said, well, in addition to those 5, we want 14 more. And Apache came and said, well, how about if we do 7? And then the discussion, OCD just said, we don't want to talk to you anymore.
Okay, so then I don't think then Apache can say that NMOCD is requesting more like these additional wells on top of what you already more or less presented in this figure.
Well, no, there was a written proposal for 5 wells, and then OCD responded in writing with an additional 14 on top of those.
Okay.
My understanding, someone could.
Now let me ask, has there been any baseline data collected in this area? You know, from, let's say, do we know the mineral composition of the groundwater in this area? Not necessarily with respect to the timeline, but has there been any data collected that can be set as the baseline data?
I'm not aware of it. You know, we have the existing wells 11 and 12, which are fairly far up gradient, but no, I don't know of that. And there can be quite a range of differences locally in the Ogallala in salinity. So, but
Okay.
no, I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that.
So
It's certainly not 14,000. So, yeah.
So prior to, let's say, the hearing, did Apache try to get NMOCD to discuss this particular chart, you know, this map where you have multiple wells proposed over each other?
This map was prepared after the discussions were cut off.
After it, okay. Okay. So then definitely there has not been any reconciliation between NMOCD's proposed well locations and then that of Apache. So that has been established. Now, do you know the time range with regards to when Apache first saw or recognized the release, and then the time that was notified to let's say the time of the remediation action, the first remediation action?
All I know is from reading the documents that we've seen, but I believe they began to do this is Bruce's area. I believe they began the excavation within days of finding the release. So I think it was done right away. Not all of it. Some of it continued into the next summer. So it occurred over a period of time.
And Apache's position is this is a single release? I know there was a follow-up question on that to clarify. Do you believe, is it Apache's testimony or your testimony that it's still a single release?
I don't know enough that I can say that for sure.
Okay. Now we've seen changes in the concentration of chloride, from, let's say, from 19 and even 23 to the latest report that was provided to NMOCD. Does Apache recognize the problem that, that is at stake here? In terms of the increment in the chloride concentration over time, even though you've done some remediation efforts, but there's still increment in that.
The remediation was all done on soil, right?
soil.
And right now we're looking at groundwater data.
So nothing has been done
on the groundwater.
on the groundwater?
No, nothing has been done on the groundwater remediation.
Okay. Okay. And then you were saying that when the latest report came through, Apache has not done anything with regards to any remediation at all.
No, well, the first step is, putting in a groundwater remediation system is very complicated and requires a lot of information, a lot of planning. And that's not something that you just do short notice. So that's something that has to be planned. And the first step is the pump test. I keep talking about the pump test, but that's typically the first step. So that tells us what size of a pump we need. For example, how much water are you going to be able to extract from a well? Is it 10 gallons per minute? Is it 100 gallons per minute? 500? How much? And that determines what size of a pump you need. That determines what size of a well you might need. There's a lot of information that you have to do to properly plan a remediation system.
Based on your experience, if you look at going around digging holes, right, compared to more or less coming up with a comprehensive plan to remediate what is going on in the groundwater, how would you rate that compared to continuously punching the holes around?
Well, so, one thing that you look at is what is at risk? If there were a residential community adjacent to this well site, pumping water for drinking water, and that's their sole source, that is a higher level of risk than out in an oil field where so it might determine a different type of action.
So there's no community in the area sourcing their water from, let's say, nearby this area?
Not at this location, no.
Okay.
The one receptor is the windmill well. And I don't want to minimize that. That's significant. But that's the receptor that's been identified.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I have a few questions as
Okay.
well. And thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate it.
Okay.
You mentioned early on in your testimony that there is a difference in the way sampling was done between March and October. I believe October's was passive sampling and March's was low flow sampling. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. I believe you mentioned that you do not feel that this has caused a difference in the numbers, but why did you feel like you had to mention that part? As far as what's so significant between the two sample procedures that would for someone who is a hydrologist, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
geologist, I'm not a hydrogeologist. So what does that trigger in your head as a hydrologist, geologist?
Well, it's a different method. So instead of using a pump that pumps a low volume of water, we put in it's called a hydrosleeve. It goes into the well, it sits for 24 hours, and then you remove it.
Okay.
So it's a little bit like, I don't know, I baked a cake with my regular oven and I used a convection oven. Is a little bit different? I don't know. It's something that triggered. When I saw the high numbers, I thought, oh man, does
Okay.
this new sampling technique cause the difference? All the reading I've done on the technique says it does not. I did talk to Mike Bratcher at OCD, and he is familiar with this, and said he likes this method. So I don't think that was it, but
Okay.
I felt it was worth mentioning.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm going to be working off of Apache Exhibit C 4.1, which was the more updated version, I believe,
Yeah.
of the contouring and everything. You mentioned that a pump test will give us better modeling. It will tell us the hydraulic properties in the area. My question then to you is, where would you, in your professional opinion, put this pump test? Is that where you were talking about TMW 27 being a bigger bore? Because you had said that the proposed TMW 27 is a larger diameter well for recovery. And then you stated that it may or may not be useful in the long run. But is that where you would propose putting this pump test?
The initial thinking was that we wanted to have a well that was located in between the identified high
Yeah.
concentrations at 17
Uh-huh.
and the suspected source area up by number 7. It's a puzzle, and we would put in 27 with the expectation that it hits high levels of chloride. Now, we don't know that for sure because we haven't done it yet, but the thinking is that that would be a good place to recover. But we might have to go further down gradient, looking at the well, and that's been alluded to by other questioners. It may be that something right next to 17 would be a better place. So that's more that we have to evaluate.
Okay. So then I guess help me figure out where you mentioned about the aquifer pump test giving us better modeling. Where would you be doing this test?
Well, that would be at 27.
It would be at
We need a
27.
larger diameter well to
Got it.
get the pumps and pressure transducers and
Okay.
things in the well.
And I may have not asked the question appropriately, so I apologize. So
No.
that was my point. Okay, 27 is where Apache proposes to do this pump
Yeah,
test.
yeah.
Okay. On this particular page, if I've understood correctly, because you stated that it was created after communication with the OCD had stopped, the 5 wells that Apache is proposing are the blue wells, correct?
Well, the original 5 were MW 25 through MW 30,
Okay, TM.
29, 25 through 29. And then OCD asked for 14 more,
Okay,
and Apache came back and said, well, we agree with 2 of those. And so then Apache had 7 on their list.
okay.
So
So that
you
includes,
should count 7 blue dots, and there would be 14 green dots, but 2 of the locations were agreed with between, so they're showing up as blue.
so the added 2 are TMW 30 and TMW 31, which correlate with OCD 39 and OCD 42.
Correct.
Okay. Great, thank you. Now, as was mentioned, there's urgency in this because this commission is set to make sure that we protect the environment, protect our water, protect as much as we can within our purview. In looking at the last set of results that Apache got from the testing of the water that your company put together and showed on this particular map, it is disconcerting that some of these, as you said, half of them went up. The other half kind of stayed the same or dropped a little bit. But the ones that went up quite significantly. especially 14, 15, 17, and 18. When we are looking at the windmill, 4 went up as well, is going up. 5 is going up also. The windmill is also going up. There is a gap between that 17 and that windmill, being that animals are drinking, cattle are drinking from this water that's coming out of the windmill, and we have such a high concentration. Would it not behoove to put a well somewhere within that space? That looks like it's more than 300 yards difference between the well and where the windmill and where TMW17 is at. In your opinion, would it not behoove to put a well in there to start monitoring what's progressively flowing towards that windmill?
Yeah, you could make the case to do that. That wasn't in either of our proposals, but you could make the case that that should be done.
Okay. And again, as I mentioned, thank you for answering that one. As I mentioned, I'm not a hydrologist and I'm not a geologist. So could you just explain to me, and you may not have the answer for this, why are we seeing such sharp increases? In 17, it's almost threefold, and in 18, it's over 8 times more. I understand water moves. I understand. I have enough chemistry to understand that chlorides will filter through with water. But in your opinion, what do you think is causing this?
I honestly really don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
It's not easy to explain.
It's a conundrum for us as well. Okay. Excellent. Those are the last questions that I have myself. Anybody else have any other questions for Mr. Graham? Okay, no more questions. We'll make sure you turn on your microphone, Mr. Mullenberg.
I apologize again.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
Can we let Mr. Grams step down for the evening?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Mr. Grams, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I think this is a great natural stopping point for all of us. It is past 5 o'clock, so we can definitely pick up tomorrow at 9 a.m. unless there's any objections to that. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. We'll see you. Mr. Mullenberg.
Yeah, just to clarify, we don't have any more witnesses on direct, so I believe we would be picking up tomorrow with the division's witnesses.
Correct.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Thanks all. Thank you, everybody.